Hello dear customizators, today we are talking about wheelbases. To be exact, we will be talking about Fanatec CSL DD PRO, Fanatec DD2 and Simucube 2 Pro. So first I would like to introduce myself to you and my sim racing background. I started my sim racing journey at around 18 years old, and of course the first wheel I bought was Logitech G25. The G25 was fine and it's a really good wheel to start with, but soon I decided that I want something more and I replaced it with Fanatec Porsche GT1 and later Fanatec Porsche GT2. And of course I heavily modified the GT2 wheel, and at one time even had the drift wheel on and replaced the shaft with the steel shaft instead of a plastic one. And the Fanatec GT2 wheel was a real breakthrough at the time, because it was one of the first wheel to, if not the first, to have the belt drive. After the GT2 I replaced it with the Fanatec V2.5, and I think that's first really serious wheelbase that I had. And after 2.5 I bought DD1. I had it for 6 months and then a good deal came up and I bought this DD2. I had this DD2 for 2 years and then I had to buy Simucube Pro because this DD2 died just 3 weeks before VRC Croatia Rally. That was in Croatia and where I planned to exhibit my simulator. So I had to buy Simucube Pro and I had to make all the adapters to be able to mount my Fanatec rims to the Simucube. Recently I borrowed this CSL DD PRO because I think it's going to be an interesting comparison between this more affordable base and these two guys that are probably one of the best on the market today. So let's see how they do. So a few days have passed and I tested CSL Elite DD Pro, and of course the first subject that differentiates them the most is the power. So CSL DD with 8 Nm and both Fanatec DD2 and Simucube with 25 Nm of torque. So you must be wondering, is 8 Nm enough or is 25 Nm too much? I think it's important to understand that having 25 Newton meters doesn't mean that you will be using 25 Newton meters all the time. In most scenarios you will have wheel force that you feel on the wheel probably well below 10 Newton meters. So why do you need the extra 15? It's because of headroom. And what is headroom? Headroom is that lot of spare power that you have for these short transients of power when you are driving on track, and when you hit a hard bump or something like that, then you have a spike that go well above 10 Newton meters of torque. And this is, I think, what differentiates this lower power wheel with these high power ones. Usually I have my wheel set up at a little bit more torque than it is in a real car, because in the simulator you usually have no motion, but I have a full motion simulator, but still the forces are a little bit lower than in a real car, so I like to feel a little bit more on the wheel. When the drivers tested my sim, they were mostly complaining about forces of the force feedback being too high. So I listened to those drivers that tested the sim and I lowered the forces on the Simucube, so now I would say it's 1-to-1 to the real thing. But it's really hard, you know, to describe a feeling you get from the wheel, because it's actually really subjective. You want to set it up how it suits you the most, but I think everybody would notice a difference between this CSL DD 8 Nm and this 25 Nm wheels. And I would recommend going with 8 Nm, not buying the 5 Nm, because I think this was on the edge of being filled too weak for the DD wheel. So rotational mass is actually the mass of the rotor, assembly and the shaft and everything. CSL DD PRO has definitely the lowest rotational mass, so it's easy for me to change the direction like this, and for DD2 it's a lot worse, so it opposes me a lot more, so that means that the rotor, outrunner motor, is having a lot of mass, and compared to Simucube it has a lot less rotational mass than the DD2. So I think rotational mass is important, not so much in these strong wheels, but when the wheels is weak like this, and when it changes the direction, if it has less rotational mass, then it's easier for the wheel to simulate the fast forces moving back and forth, because it doesn't have to overcome its own mass. But I would give the edge to Simucube because it's the strongest and its rotational mass is almost comparable to the CSL DD PRO, and which is a lot weaker wheel. And that brings us to the next subject, and that is cogging. Cogging is quite an unwanted feeling in the DD bases, and most of them have a problem with it. It's basically what you feel is the magnets inside the rotor of the motor. So you can feel the polarity of magnets while moving the axle like this, and you can see that it makes uneven opposing force while you're trying to turn it. They usually battle this with the software, so in software they make special kind of formulas that are while controlling the rotation of the motor, they are counteracting these forces that are making the motor feel stronger or weaker depending on which position the rotor is. So with software they are dealing with this, and I would say the cogging is pretty much felt on the CSL DD PRO, and on the DD2 it's a little bit less pronounced, but it's still there. You can see that when I'm moving the wheel it opposes me. And on the Simucube there is no cogging. I cannot feel it at all. So if we would have a winner in cogging, it would definitely be Simucube, because you cannot feel the cogging at all. DD2 on the other hand, you can feel a bit, but really not so much. I think it's negligible now. In the early days when they just released the wheel, I know it was felt a lot harder. I literally felt it during a race all the time when I'm turning the wheel. It's comparable to feeling the gears on the Logitech G25 wheel. I know many of you might start with that wheel, so it's the similar feeling but not that much pronounced. And nowadays I must admit they are dealing with it quite well, and it's good. On the CSL DD PRO it's also not I didn't felt it. There's one thing I noticed that Simucube does much better than Fanatec wheels, and that is bump stop. And what I mean when I say bump stop, it's the turning point of a wheel when you turn it and you reach the end of the turning. So it like in a real car, you cannot turn the wheel anymore, and it's a hard stop. And on the Fanatec wheels I never could get this bump stop to feel good. It was always like springy action, like when you go to bump stop and then it's not a hard stop, it's like a springy action and it wants to return your wheel like this. And I'm not really sure if this is something software does, I mean simulation software, or it's inside the base. But I had to play with some files to get this bump stop action under control, because my wheel would go like this. And with the Simucube, you just set the bump stop inside the Simucube software. So you set the degrees of rotation you want to have for your wheel, and you can set the bump stop to soft, medium or hard. And having 25 Newton meters is really important in this case, because you want this feeling that you cannot turn the wheel anymore, and you can really get that in the Simucube wheel. So very good for Simucube for bump stop. So that brings us to the next subject, and that is reliability. And in this regard I definitely must give the edge to Simucube compared to Fanatec products, because the Simucube is built like a military grade product, and you can definitely feel the simplicity and the ruggedness of the design. So they did not choose to get overcomplicated with stuff, and I think it's a good choice, because less thing to be malfunctioned. On the Fanatec, On the other hand, they made a completely different approach. They wanted to pack the product with a lot of features. They have their proprietary wheels, which have this quick release system with the connector, so you get all the functions on the wheel through the base. But is that necessarily a good thing? I would say no, because when you buy a Fanatec wheelbase, you're obligated to run their own proprietary wheel rims. And that might be a problem if something on the base fails. Like in my case, the base now only recognizes McLaren wheel and doesn't recognize any other wheel. And because the base has this connector, I cannot use any other rim. The wheel does not want to start if a wheel rim is not detected. So in my case, it's a big problem because I cannot put any other wheel because the base will not start. So in the Simucube, you are free to use any wheel you want, but in the Fanatec, you are limiting yourself to Fanatec ecosystem only. And the most thing I can hear people complain about is when they attach their wheel to the quick release, it's loose and it's not tight. It can even produce some unwanted rattling. In the CSL, I noticed that the quick release is a bit smaller than on the DD2, so on the CSL DD PRO, my F1 wheel is making noises. Doesn't stay firm on the quick release, and on DD2 the tolerances are much tighter and it doesn't have this problem. The other thing that CSL DD Pro has a problem with is this quick release is mounted on a plastic shaft, and I really don't know why Fanatec did this. I think it's one of their worst decisions because this could have potentially been a very good product. I just cannot understand. If you make a good product, so a DD wheel for an affordable price, why make a plastic shaft and just ruin the product entirely? So people are complaining about this shaft not being straight, and you can see it in my example that this is not, and you can see by how much. And in some cases I heard that people actually broke the shaft, and it really eludes me why Fanatec would do this. I don't know, maybe there are some hidden reasons. Maybe they don't want the product to be too good in the price range, so they can still sell more expensive products, something like that, because steel shaft is better in every regard compared to plastic one. Of course, they are calling it carbon composite shaft, but that's just, I would say, some PR stuff. It's actually plastic infused with some carbon, which does not make it nearly as strong as a real carbon shaft would be. When you remove the rear cover from the CSL DD, you can see the aluminum heatsink, and you can see that it has a single PCB connected to the motor contacts. In this case, I think this is a good approach, as it makes disassembly and assembly a lot easier. It should also bring down the servicing costs. You should note that these connectors are only soldered to the PCB and they don't have any additional supports, so be very careful while handling the base not to damage these connectors. As you have seen before, you can remove this quick release and the connector uses USB-C. I don't see nothing wrong with that. I think it's a okay idea. This part is also plastic, so note that if you want to attach anything to this part, it should not be too heavy because it could bend or be broken. On DD2, this part is made out of aluminum, and now you can see the entire carbon shaft and the bearing. Everything is held together by these small screws and this plastic piece. The carbon composite shaft is coming out of a mold, so the bending is probably caused by the thermal expansion, and on this base you can see that the shaft offset is around 1.3 mm. The McLaren wheel sits a bit better on this QR and makes less noise than the F1 wheel. The DD2 base has a lot more rugged design. It has these decorative carbon plates, but the rest of it is aluminum. Inside you can see a lot of wiring, a lot of connectors and a lot of different PCB boards. When you remove the casing, you can see the outrunner motor, and the black aluminum piece is the heatsink. Here you can see how complicated it is to remove the rear PCB board from the motor, and that reveals another PCB board that is inside. This board is used for wireless power transmission, and it has one additional small auxiliary board that is used for optical data transmission. And finally, the front display. When you add all this up, it makes a very complex product with a lot of wiring, a lot of internal components, PCBs, connectors that are prone to failures or manufacturing problems. So to conclude this video, that is probably already too long, about comparing these three products, I think CSL DD PRO could have been a great product if they didn't mess up with the plastic shaft. Possibility of breaking the shaft, I think, is a concern you should consider. And the DD2 is a great wheel. I think it surely can compare to one of the best DD wheels on the market, feeling wise, but I think reliability is the problem here, and I think many of these units could fail. So you should consider that before you buy a wheel. If it's in 5-year warranty, then I guess you're fine because you don't pay anything for the service jobs, but after that you might be in a big problem. Also because Fanatec does not offer parts for you to replace them by yourself. You need to send the unit over to them. They need to repair it and then return it, and it's quite expensive to do that. And the Simucube, on the other hand, I would say is the best wheel in these three wheels here, definitely. It might seem that Fanatec maybe offers a little bit more features for the same money, but I think in the long run the Simucube is a better buy options because the Fanatec could break down, and this should work for a considerable long period of time. The Simucube has excellent feeling. It does not have any clogging issues. It's super strong. It has great bump stomp feel, and it just works from the first day I bought it. No problems, no disconnections, no anything. It just works.